I wasn't supposed to notice it. Not the way his eyes lingered on me longer than necessary. Not the way his tone softened when he said my name. But that night, the night it all began, there was no mistaking it. It was New Year's Eve. Mom was in the kitchen, humming her favorite tune, preparing the feast like she always did. Dishes clattered, laughter echoed from the living room, and everything felt normal, except for him. Douglas, my stepfather, leaned against the doorframe, swirling a glass of wine in his hand. His gaze wasn't on the fireworks outside or the family gathered around the TV. It was on me. "Tyler," he said, his voice low, almost conspiratorial. "Come here for a second." I hesitated. Something in the air felt heavy, charged, like the calm before a storm. But curiosity, or maybe defiance, pushed me forward. "What is it?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. He smiled, a slow, deliberate curve of his lips. "I've got an idea for a game, a little tradition for the family." Mom appeared then, wiping her hands on a towel, her face lighting up. "A game? Douglas, you always have the best ideas." If only she knew. The game was simple: new year, new rules. Each person had to write down a list of personal challenges or wishes for the month ahead. Douglas presented it like a fun way to bond as a family. But when he handed me my list, folded neatly into a crisp rectangle, I felt a chill. Inside, the handwriting was sharp and precise. The first line read, "Spend more time with me. Alone." I glanced at him, trying to read his expression, but he was already helping Mom set the table, acting like everything was perfectly innocent. That night, while everyone was busy counting down to midnight, I stayed in my room, staring at the list. The second item was even stranger. "Tell me something about yourself that no one else knows." It could have been harmless. Maybe he was just trying to connect. But deep down, I knew better. There was something wrong about this game, something unsettling. And when my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number, I knew exactly who it was. "Your move, Tyler. Don't disappoint me." I didn't respond. Instead, I stayed in bed, heart pounding, replaying the evening in my mind. His gaze, his smile, the way his fingers brushed mine when he handed me the note, it was all too much. But the next morning, he acted as if nothing had happened. Breakfast was filled with laughter and casual conversation. He was the perfect husband, the perfect stepfather. And yet, when Mom left to run errands, leaving the two of us alone, he leaned in close, his voice barely above a whisper. "Did you think about the list?" I froze. "What list?" His smile widened. "Good girl. Let's keep this our little secret, okay?" That was the first moment I realized I was trapped in his game. He wasn't asking. He was telling. And the rules were his to make. The next few days were a blur of mixed signals and growing tension. He was everywhere, offering to help with my schoolwork, sitting too close during family movie nights, finding excuses to touch my shoulder or brush against my arm. But it wasn't until the following Saturday that things escalated. Mom had gone to visit a friend, leaving me and Douglas alone in the house. I tried to avoid him, staying in my room, pretending to be busy. But when he knocked on my door, I knew it was pointless. "Tyler, can I come in?" I hesitated, gripping the edge of my desk. "Why?" "Just to talk." His voice was calm, too calm. Against my better judgment, I opened the door. He stood there, holding a mug of hot chocolate, his expression unreadable. "Thought you might want this. It's cold tonight." I took the mug, trying to ignore the way his fingers lingered against mine. "Thanks." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "What are you doing?" My voice wavered, betraying the fear I was trying so hard to hide. "Relax," he said, his tone smooth, almost soothing. "I just wanted to check on you. You seemed distant." "I'm fine." He didn't move, didn't leave. Instead, he leaned against the wall, studying me like I was a puzzle he was trying to solve. "You know," he began, his voice dropping lower, "this game isn't just about the rules. It's about trust. And I want us to trust each other." My pulse quickened. "I think you should go." He smirked, a slow, deliberate curve of his lips that sent shivers down my spine. Don't worry, Tyler. You'll get the hang of it. Eventually. That night, I lay awake, replaying every word, every glance, every touch. The walls of my room felt like they were closing in, suffocating me. And when my phone buzzed again, I almost didn't want to look. But I did. Tomorrow, midnight. Meet me in the living room. Don't be late. I stared at the message, my hands trembling. This wasn't a game anymore. This was a trap. And I was caught in it. It was strange, but I couldn't resist the pull of curiosity. The note was signed simply, Doug. Attached was a list of wishes for the month ahead. Some seemed harmless enough. Watch a movie with me, or tell me something about yourself that I don't know. But there was one that made my stomach twist. Stay with me alone tonight. I tried to convince myself it was just a joke. Maybe the game really was some innocent family tradition, and he just wanted to include me. But every time I met his gaze, it lingered too long, felt too knowing. That evening, I made a decision I shouldn't have. I completed one item from his list. I watched a movie with him. The house was quiet. Mom had gone to bed early, exhausted from the day's errands. Doug was waiting in the living room, the TV already on, a bottle of wine open on the coffee table. Thought you might like this one, he said, patting the seat next to him. I hesitated for a moment, but my curiosity got the better of me. I sat down, keeping as much space between us as the couch would allow. At first, it was fine. He was casual, friendly even, making small talk about the movie's plot. But as the minutes ticked by, I noticed the subtle shifts. His arm rested along the back of the couch, creeping closer. His voice softened, his words slower, like he was savoring every syllable. And then his hand brushed mine. It was so light, so fleeting, I could have convinced myself it was accidental. But I didn't. I froze, my heart racing, every nerve in my body screaming at me to pull away. But I didn't. Relax, he said, his voice low, almost soothing. You're so tense, Tyler. I'm fine, I lied, pulling my hand into my lap. His eyes never left mine. You're not used to this kind of attention, are you? What are you talking about? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He smiled, the kind of smile that felt more like a trap than reassurance. You're growing up, becoming a woman. It's natural for people to notice. I wanted to leave, to run upstairs and lock my door. But I stayed, rooted to the spot, trapped between confusion and fear. The movie ended, but he didn't move. Well, I said, standing abruptly, I should probably go to bed. He caught my wrist, gentle but firm. Wait, just one more thing. What? Remember the list, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I want you to trust me. This game, it's about trust. I pulled my hand away, muttering a quick good night before retreating to my room. I couldn't sleep that night. His words replayed in my mind, twisting and turning until they didn't make sense anymore. Trust. What kind of trust was he talking about? And then there was the list. It sat on my desk, folded neatly, mocking me with its simplicity. I knew I should have torn it up, thrown it away, but instead, I unfolded it and read it again. The next item was even worse. Tell me something you've never told anyone. The following day, I tried to act normal. Breakfast was the usual chaos, with Mom rushing around, Doug reading the paper, and me pretending like nothing was wrong. But when Mom left for work, leaving the two of us alone, the air grew heavy again. What are you doing today? He asked, leaning against the counter, watching me too closely. Homework, I said quickly. I've got a lot to catch up on. He smiled, that same slow, deliberate smile that made my skin crawl. Well, don't forget the game. I'm looking forward to your answer. What answer? You know, he said, tapping the side of his temple like we shared some unspoken secret. The next item. I didn't respond. Instead, I grabbed my bag and fled upstairs, locking myself in my room. Hours passed, but I couldn't focus on anything. His words, his smile, the way he looked at me, it all swirled together in a sickening loop. And then my phone buzzed. I'm waiting, Tyler. My stomach dropped. The message wasn't from an unknown number this time. It was from Doug. I sat on my bed, staring at the screen, my mind racing. How did he get my number? Why was he doing this? My first instinct was to block him, but something stopped me. Part of me wanted to know how far he would go, what his endgame was. I typed out a quick reply. This isn't funny. His response came almost immediately. Who said I was joking? Midnight. Living room. Don't make me come get you. I didn't go. Instead, I stayed in my room, lights off, listening to every creak and groan of the house, waiting for the sound of his footsteps. But they never came. When I woke the next morning, there was a new note on my desk. Strike one. Don't test me. The days that followed were a nightmare of stolen glances, whispered words, and moments that lingered too long. Doug was careful, always careful, never doing anything outright that could be called out. But I felt it. The way he watched me, the way he cornered me in small, unassuming ways. And I was too scared to tell anyone. But deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. A few days later, the game escalated. Doug's requests grew bolder, and the messages came more frequently. One night, I read the latest one under the dim glow of my phone. Come to me tonight. I stared at the words, my heart pounding. I knew how wrong it was. Every instinct told me to stop, to end whatever this was before it went too far. But there was another part of me, a darker, more curious part, that couldn't turn away. That weekend, Mom left for the night to visit a friend. Doug seized the opportunity. Let's have dinner together, he suggested casually, leaning against the kitchen counter as I tried to avoid his gaze. Just the two of us. We can talk. I hesitated, shaking my head. I don't think. It's just dinner. Tyler, he interrupted, his voice smooth, persuasive. You've been avoiding me. I thought we were having fun. I wanted to say no, to tell him I wasn't playing anymore. But his words held a weight that pressed against me, making me feel small, unsure. Before I realized it, I was sitting across from him at the dining table. The dinner was quiet at first, almost normal. Doug asked questions about school, my friends, things that felt innocent enough. But his tone, the way his eyes lingered on mine, made my skin prickle. Then, as he reached across the table to adjust a napkin near my plate, his hand brushed against mine. He didn't pull away. Instead, his fingers rested there for a moment too long, deliberate and unyielding. I froze, every muscle in my body screaming for me to pull back. But I didn't. You're trembling, he said softly, his voice dipping just enough to send a shiver down my spine. I'm fine, I managed to say, though my voice betrayed me. No, you're not, he countered, leaning closer. You're scared, but you don't have to be. His words were laced with something that made me feel both exposed and drawn in. After dinner, he suggested we move to the living room. Just to talk, he said again, as if repeating it would make it true. I sat on the edge of the couch, trying to keep a safe distance. But he closed the gap, his presence overwhelming. You're different, he said, his eyes searching mine. You're not like other girls your age. I swallowed hard, unsure of what to say. Do you know how special that makes you? He continued, his voice low and deliberate. I wanted to laugh, to call out how absurd it all sounded, but instead, I felt my defenses cracking under the weight of his words. The game continued. His messages became more cryptic, more demanding, and I, despite my better judgment, kept playing along. One night, he sent a single message, meet me in the garage at midnight. I stared at the text for what felt like an eternity. My mind raced with questions and fears, but also with an undeniable pull. What was he planning? Why couldn't I just ignore him? When the clock struck midnight, I found myself creeping down the stairs, my heart pounding with every step. The house was dark, silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Doug was waiting in the garage, leaning casually against the workbench. He didn't look surprised to see me. I knew you'd come, he said, a smirk playing on his lips. I shouldn't be here, I said, my voice barely audible. But you are, he countered, stepping closer. That's what matters. He handed me a glass of wine, gesturing for me to sit on the old love seat tucked in the corner. I hesitated but obeyed, my mind a whirlwind of doubt and curiosity. As the night wore on, his words became bolder, his compliments sharper. He talked about trust again, about how our connection was different, special. And then he reached for my hand. "Do you trust me?" he asked, his voice a whisper that seemed to fill the entire garage. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The next day, I tried to avoid him. I stayed locked in my room, ignoring his messages, pretending like the previous night hadn't happened. But it didn't matter. Doug had a way of finding cracks in my armor, slipping through when I least expected it. The tension reached a breaking point a week later. Mom was out again, and Doug cornered me in the hallway. "You've been distant," he said, his tone half accusing, half teasing. "I've been busy," I replied, trying to step around him. He blocked my path, his smile disarming and dangerous. "I miss our talks, Tyler. I don't think we should." "Stop," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "You're overthinking this. It's just us. No one else has to know." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. They weren't just a suggestion, they were a command. And the worst part was, a small, shameful part of me didn't want to disobey. I felt trapped, caught in a web I didn't even realize I was tangled in. And Doug was the spider, weaving it tighter around me with every passing day. That night I sat on my bed, staring at the latest note he'd left on my desk. "One more step, Tyler. Just one more." I didn't know how much longer I could resist. Or if I even wanted to. I thought I could stop. Thought I could end it all and go back to how things used to be. But Doug wasn't letting go. One evening, Mom came home earlier than expected. I was in the kitchen with Doug, and we were too close, too familiar. He leaned over my shoulder as I tried to focus on chopping vegetables, his hand grazing my arm. The sound of the front door opening made my heart leap. I stepped back quickly, but Mom's sharp gaze caught us both. Her eyes narrowed as she stood in the doorway, her purse still in her hand. "Am I interrupting something?" she asked, her voice casual but laced with suspicion. Doug didn't flinch. "Everything's fine, Clara," he said smoothly, turning to her with that practiced smile. "Tyler and I were just starting dinner. You're home early." Mom stared at us for a moment longer, then shrugged, brushing it off. Traffic was light, but the silence that followed was anything but light. It pressed down on me, suffocating. That night, I cornered Doug in the hallway. My heart pounded as I forced the words out. "I'm done. I'm not playing anymore." He didn't seem surprised. Instead, he smiled, a slow, knowing smile that sent a chill through me. "It's not just a game, Tyler," he said, his voice calm and deliberate. "You're already in it, and you can't just stop." "I can," I insisted, though my voice shook. "I'm done, Doug." He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "You think it's that simple?" he asked, his tone almost amused. "You don't get it, do you? You crossed the line. There's no going back now." The days that followed were tense. I avoided him as much as I could, locking myself in my room, ignoring his texts and notes. But Doug wasn't the type to back down. One afternoon, I found a new note slipped under my door. It was shorter than usual, but its meaning was clear. "If you're not with me, you're against me." Things escalated quickly after that. Doug began finding subtle ways to remind me of his control. A hand lingering on my shoulder as he passed me in the kitchen. A knowing glance across the room when Mom wasn't looking. And then there was the night of the storm. The rain was pounding against the windows, and the power had gone out, plunging the house into darkness. I was in my room, trying to calm my racing thoughts, when I heard a knock on the door. I froze. "Who is it?" "It's me." Doug's voice came through, low and steady. I didn't respond. "Tyler," he said, quieter this time. "We need to talk." "No, we don't," I replied, my voice firm. He didn't leave. "You can't ignore me forever." The door handle jiggled, and panic shot through me. "Doug, stop," I shouted. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, his tone almost soothing. "I just want to talk." I backed away from the door, my breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. "Go away, Doug. Please." There was a long pause, and then I heard him step back. The sound of his retreating footsteps was a relief, but it didn't erase the fear that had taken root in me. The next morning, I found another note on my desk. "You'll come around. You always do." The words felt like a threat, a promise, and a challenge all at once. I tried to tell myself that I was imagining things, that Doug wasn't dangerous, that he was just testing boundaries. But deep down, I knew better. And then it happened. It was late, and Mom was in her room, fast asleep. I was heading downstairs to grab a glass of water when I heard voices. Doug was on the phone, his tone low and serious. "She's slipping," he said. "I'll handle it, but you need to stay out of it." I froze on the stairs, my blood running cold. Who was he talking to? And what did he mean by handle it? I crept back to my room, my mind racing. The pieces were starting to fall into place, and the picture they formed was terrifying. Doug wasn't just playing a game. He was orchestrating something far more dangerous. I knew I had to act, but I wasn't sure how. The fear of confronting him directly was paralyzing. And then there was Mom. How could I protect her without telling her everything? The tension in the house grew unbearable. Every glance, every word felt charged with an unspoken threat. And then, one night, Doug cornered me again. "Why are you avoiding me?" he asked, his tone deceptively calm. "I'm not," I lied, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, you are," he said, stepping closer. "You think you can outsmart me, Tyler? You think you can just walk away?" "I'm not playing your games anymore," I said, my voice shaking. He leaned in, his eyes boring into mine. "Oh, Tyler," he said softly, almost pityingly. "This isn't a game. It's reality. And you're in deeper than you realize." I felt the walls closing in around me, the weight of his words suffocating. I had to do something before it was too late. But what I didn't realize was that the explosion I feared was already in motion. And when it came, it would shatter everything. The apartment was cloaked in an eerie silence that night, the kind that wrapped itself around you, squeezing tight. I stayed in my room, pretending to study, but my mind was far from the textbook sprawled across my desk. I'd been avoiding him for days, dodging his glances, slipping out of rooms before he could enter. But deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time. And then it happened, a soft knock on my door. I froze. My hands gripped the edge of the desk as if anchoring me to the spot. "Tyler." Doug's voice was calm, steady. Too steady. "Open the door. We need to talk." I didn't move. Maybe if I stayed quiet, he'd leave. But the second knock was firmer, more insistent. "Tyler, come on. Just 5 minutes." My pulse thundered in my ears. I didn't want to open it. I knew I shouldn't. But somehow my feet carried me to the door. My hand hovered over the doorknob, trembling. With a deep breath, I turned it and opened the door just enough to see him standing there. Doug leaned casually against the doorframe, his face a mask of calm composure. But his eyes, they betrayed him. They were sharp, calculating, like a predator sizing up its prey. "I just want to talk," he said, his tone almost disarmingly gentle. "Can I come in?" "Doug, my voice faltered. "It's late." "Just 5 minutes," he repeated, already pushing the door open wider. He stepped inside without waiting for my permission, closing the door behind him with a quiet click that felt deafening in the stillness. The air in the room grew heavy, suffocating. "You've been avoiding me," he began, his voice low, almost soothing. "Why?" I turned away, pretending to busy myself with the books on my desk. "I haven't," I lied. He moved closer, his footsteps soft but deliberate. "We're family, Tyler. Families don't keep secrets." My stomach churned at the word family. I forced myself to meet his gaze. "There's nothing to talk about," I said firmly, though my voice betrayed the tremor of fear beneath. His smile was faint, but it carried a weight that made my skin crawl. "There's everything to talk about," he said. "You're part of this now. You can't just walk away." Before I could respond, he reached out, his hand brushing against mine. I pulled back instinctively, but the damage was already done. He stepped closer, invading my space. "Doug, stop," I whispered, my voice barely audible. But he didn't. He leaned in, his breath warm against my cheek. My body stiffened, my mind screaming at me to push him away, to run, to do anything but stand there frozen. "You're scared," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But you don't need to be. I'd never hurt you." The irony of his words hit me like a punch to the gut. He was already hurting me more than he could ever understand. And yet I couldn't move. His words were chains binding me in place. When it was over, he stepped back, his expression as calm and composed as ever. "You're truly part of the family now," he said, his voice dripping with false affection. I said nothing. I couldn't. My mind was a whirlwind of fear, anger, and a sickening sense of betrayal. He left the room without another word, leaving me alone with my thoughts. That night, I made a decision. I couldn't stay silent any longer. I couldn't let him win. I went to Mom's room, my hands trembling as I knocked softly on her door. She opened it, her face etched with concern. "Tyler? What's wrong?" Tears welled up in my eyes as I stepped inside. "I need to tell you something," I said, my voice breaking. I told her everything. The notes, the manipulation, the way he'd cornered me in my room. She listened silently, her expression shifting from confusion to horror to a cold, steely resolve. When I finished, she pulled me into a tight embrace. "We'll handle this," she whispered, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. "I promise you, Tyler. He'll never touch you again." The next morning, Doug was gone. Mom told me he'd left for a business trip, but I knew better. Her eyes held a fire I'd never seen before, a fire that told me she'd done something to protect me. I didn't ask questions. I didn't need to. Weeks turned into months. Mom and I moved to a new city, leaving the house, the memories, and Doug behind. She became quieter, more guarded, but also stronger. I saw it in the way she carried herself, the way she looked at me with fierce determination. As for me, I tried to move on, but the scars lingered. Guilt gnawed at me, whispering that I should have stopped it sooner, that I should have spoken up before it got this far. But deep down, I knew the truth. Staying silent would have been the biggest mistake of all. Now, I tell my story not for sympathy, but as a warning. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Speak up. Fight back. Don't let fear silence you. Because the moment you do, you lose control. And control is the one thing you can never afford to give away.